live. You can start.
Okay, let's wait for another 2 minutes and then we'll start. Okay, let's get started. Okay. Hello everyone and welcome to the 14th webinar organized by Parrhesia Collective. Today we will be hosting Lara Aharonian. Welcome, Lara. For those who are not familiar with what the collective does, I would like to give a very brief introduction. Parrhesia Collective is made up of a group of women from different countries in search of truth and creativity based on their interest in social sciences and the arts. Parrhesia Collective has been organizing webinars with esteemed scholars, writers, and artists on indigeneity, temporality, and gender. Alongside the webinar series, Parrhesia Collective actively uses social media accounts to have their word out in Western Armenian, Turkish, and English to reach out to a wider audience. Parrhesia Collective also translates quotes of prominent philosophers, social scientists, and artists into Western Armenian and shares them on social media to contribute to the intellectual and philosophical debates. Members of Parrhesia Collective are also contributing to Istanbul-based Agos newspaper bi-weekly in 3 languages and also contribute to Radio Agos on the first Saturday of every month. You can follow Parrhesia Collective through its social media accounts and its website. We are also sending newsletters to those who are in our communication loop. If you want to receive the newsletter, please write to us at parrhesiacollective@gmail.com. We would like to thank Kalust Gulbenkian Foundation for their invaluable support to maintain this project. I would like to thank also Tamar Gürcihan and Dença Değirmenci for their technical support at broadcasting this webinar. Today, it's also a special day. We also would like to celebrate our 4th year as Parrhesia Collective. We started sharing on our social media accounts on the 10th of April, actually. So it's almost our anniversary. And what better opportunity to celebrate it actually with another fellow woman, Lara Aharonian. And welcome again, Lara. I leave the floor to Tallinn first to introduce you.
Thank you. So, welcome everybody, and it's an honor and privilege to have Lara for our birthday, actually. And we know each other with Lara, I guess, 16 and plus some years, and we got to know each other in Armenia. So that was the third place that she established her life. She was born and raised in Lebanon, and after the civil war in Lebanon, she became a migrant in Canada, became a migrant in Canada, and after actually studying, establishing her life there, once again she moved to this time with her children and family to Armenia. And this was in 2003, and we met around 2007 and worked on Zabeli Esayan. But she has already been working on Zabeli Esayan ever since she arrived Yerevan. And at that time, the idea to work on Zabelia Sayan was actually initiated by her, because she went every week almost to the museum to work on her archives and letters. And that was the starting point to make research about Zabelia Sayan's family, and then the documentary that probably some of our listeners or in the audience, they know about, Finding Zabelia Sayan, that we filmed together. And we have 3 languages of that documentary as well. And she's still living in Armenia with her family, and she's a feminist activist, and they have a women's resource center together with Kohar Shahnazarian. Zabelia Sayan research continues for her, and she has a website, zabeliasayan.info, and she has 2 Facebook pages, one for Zabelia Sayan and one for Sırpuhi Dusap. And her work in Armenia is not only restricted to Armenia, but she is an internationally well-known feminist activist, and she works for gender equality and injustices and violence in its various forms. So, welcome, Lara.
Thank you, Kalin. Thank you for inviting me for this interesting, with this interesting collective. And I'm very happy to be part of your celebrations this time.
Thank you. Aras, it's your turn, I guess.
Hi, I want to say hi from Beirut, from Burç. And Lara, while following your activism in Armenia, I secretly take pride that you were born and raised in Beirut. And, or as I'd like to say, Beiruti Churkhameres. So I would like to know more about this. What are your most vivid memories from your childhood in Beirut? And what are the things that you carried from Beirut? Not only the material things, also the intangible ones. Well, you had to flee, if it's the correct word, to Canada. You flee the war.
Thank you, Aras. It's funny because as I get older, I come back often to Beirut, even though at some point I was a little bit distant. But Beirut remains a very important part of myself and the work I do and the resilience I have. Because, I mean, if you're born in Beirut, you already are very resilient, even though we are tired of being resilient. But I think it's something that life teaches you. I was born in Beirut, and for me, Beirut is also mainly about both my grandmothers, because my mother used to work, and I used to spend a lot of times at my both grandmothers' houses. One in Ashrafieh, the other one in Jaladeep. So it was really for me all these good memories where even though there was war, ongoing war, I was born and 3 years later the war started and never ended. Unfortunately, still continues. So for me, it was the Beirut of my grandmothers who came to this place as a place of peace for them and also a safety place. And I used to spend a lot of time among their friends, female friends, because Beirut was also a very patriarchal country, society, and grandmothers and mothers used to have their own circles, female circles, which was part also of their resilience strategies. So I used to spend a lot of times in subhiyes among other women, and also with one of my grandmother's famous shirkats, where she would gather all her friends and talk about things while men were at work and, you know, doing other stuff. So these were my most important memories of Beirut.
And your grandmothers were from which part of Armenia, historical Armenia?
Well, it's very different. One grandmother is mostly from Dikranagert and her husband from Akshehir. So my other grandmother were from Mardin, Sepastia, and she arrived through Tripoli with her mother and sister. She arrived by boat, so I often grew up with her stories, even though she was very young. But these were the stories I was told, and Tripoli has a special place, and and then her story of surviving and trying to thrive in a new country and finding ways of rebuilding the community, which were very scattered and uh, divided, and also, traumatized in a way.
So after the war started and after those idyllic days with your grandmothers, things got tougher and you moved to Canada, and another chapter in your life started, as you shared. And can you talk about your days in Canada, your realizations about your previous state in Lebanon? What happened to Lara in Canada?
So as I said, I grew up in war, but it was part of my childhood and my youth. But it was something that I learned to live with. It was part of my routine. Even though the war was in the background, we continued living, we continued thriving, we continued celebrating and having all the celebrations, birthdays and weddings and everything else. And it was a very community-based life, collective, going to the community center, doing scouting and all these things were going to Armenian school. Even during the worst times of war, being in a shelter, but being with friends and not really feeling like a victim while living in Lebanon, feeling actually quite happy to be surrounded by friends and community members. And of course, there were times where it was really traumatizing, where I used to run on the streets to get to a shelter, carrying my small brother. So there were a lot of traumas that I carried, but it was part of regular life. And when it got even stronger afterwards in the 90s, it was really hard. Our house was bombarded, and my father decided that it was enough. We need to leave this country because it's not possible to live safely. I was 17 at that time, and it was heartbreaking for me because I was leaving everything behind, my grandparents, my home, my friends, my school. So it was a long journey, which took me from Cyprus to Canada, a very cold country, very peaceful, very silent. That's where, for the first time in my life, I felt the silence, the large silence, when you arrive and you land in this snow-covered country. And then I started realizing and thinking about my life in Lebanon. That's where, for the first time, I felt that, the victimhood of being in a war-torn country, how much trauma I lived. But I never used to think about all those things while I was in Lebanon. For me, Lebanon was a happy place, despite everything that was going on. So that's why now I come back to Lebanon often. And Canada was this huge new place, which I knew nothing about, which I didn't share anything except maybe a little bit the French language, which were not the same. But it was a place where I could rest a little bit and take a deep breath and think about everything that happened in my life and as a family as well. But it was also a very isolating place because I felt so alone with my pain, my traumas, my worries. I was looking at people around. I went to college here, and I was not being able to relate to anyone, and the food was not the same. Nothing smelled the same. So a lot of heartbreak, a lot of longing to go back to this happy place of childhood, which eventually over the years was changing as well. It was not staying the same thing. So Canada was a temporary relief space where I understood that I was a victim, apparently, all those years in war-torn Lebanon. And I learned also how to think about healing. What is healing? It was also my first steps in going to university and also thinking about women's rights and gender equality and how women in this new country were mobilizing themselves, which was very different from the mobilization I've learned from my grandmothers, which was the same kind of objective, but in different ways. They had their traditional ways of doing it, and here I was in a Western country, giving me a new space to do things and think about gender and healing and trauma. And then for me, it was time to move on from here because it seems that I could not stay in the same place. I'm always in between two different worlds, always in exile, belonging somewhere, not belonging. And that's how I decided that I need to go back somewhere. But where was this going back? For me, it was the logical thing and more emotional thing also to go back. I don't know, I use the word go back, but it's interesting to go to Armenia because Armenia was more than just this physical space. That's why I was going back to something where my grandmothers were telling me about the space, which was not the present day Armenia. It was an Armenia in their minds. And I was always wanting to go back. And that's where my community was teaching me to always want to go back to this place. And the closest to that space was present day Republic of Armenia.
Okay, probably you already started, so you can just continue. And how was I think it was your first contact with Birthright Armenia, right? Yeğirmişaguyt.
Actually, yes, land and culture, actually. It
And then
was
culture, sorry, yeah.
first time I went there, it was in 1999, and it was to help out with reconstruction. And it was one opportunity I found for volunteers. So I went to Karindak in Nagorno-Karabakh, and I spent the whole 1 month and a half in this village, reconstructing the church, cleaning this church. And I learned a lot because I was coming from a war-torn country. And it was after Canada, I was again back to a space where women specifically were living in a conflict and also ongoing conflict at that time. So for me, it brought back a lot of memories, I remembered how I felt, and that's how I connected very quickly with women in Karabakh. And they were my first community tribe in a way that I was being able to belong to. Then I came back again after 2 years, again as a volunteer from Canada. This time I brought my eldest daughter, Amasya, with me. She was 1 at that time. And I went back to Shushi this time to reconstruct the hospital. And we stayed again for more than a month, trying to survive in a way in this space, which was very different from the village where we didn't have running water and it was all torn. And it reminded me a lot about Beirut and all these buildings who were really destroyed. And I felt really, it was hard to witness that. But it was important for me because apart from reconstruction, I used this time to connect with women there. And during my spare time, I would take Amasya on my back and we would go to people's house, drink coffee with women, read the coffee cup, and talk about difficult issues, which are hard to ask. And women will open up to me and talk about things that they would not feel comfortable to talk about, especially when you have all these militaristic environment where you have to not talk about sensitive issues and be silent about certain things because it's not allowed and it could be put you in danger. So it was quite, for me, interesting to see all this and to see the resilience of these women who are living their daily life. Never, they had unresolved grief, trauma, but continuing surviving in this non-recognized territory. And that helped me to learn a lot about myself.
So perhaps we can also talk about a little bit of Yerevan and then Women's Resource Center and your activities over the years before we continue to other, well, we have lots of topics waiting. Okay.
So then I decided to move because I always wanted to move to Armenia together with my partner, Rafi. We always wanted, when we were at university, we thought, first person who gets a job, we can move there. So we have some kind of stability. And of course, it was very difficult for our parents to understand that because they saved us from a very difficult space. They saved us from war in Lebanon. They gave us Canada with all its, peaceful and privileges. And then suddenly, I don't know what's happening with us. We decided to go to Armenia, where it was not really a safe space according to their standards, and they didn't understand why we wanted to go. And so we went slowly. We went as we said, oh, we're going for a couple of months, and then we said we're staying longer, and then this longer has been 20 years already. So we went with two kids, and then I had also two other kids in Armenia. So it was the first children who were born in our family in Armenia. And for me, it's like some kind of a closure to have to be in Armenia and to give birth in Armenia. And to learn a lot about my identity as well. Because the interesting thing was when I moved to Yerevan, I thought that, oh, I'm Armenian, so I go to Yerevan and I adapt, I integrate. But no, it was not like that. I said, but do I belong here? I don't share the food. These people don't use spices apart from pepper and coriander and salt. We don't drink coffee the same way, and the smells are not the same. The history is different. The singing, the music is different. So I felt really not. I thought I was going back home, but it was not really the home I was expecting, because that home doesn't really exist, because it's a mix of different things. It's a mix of my grandmother's home and the journey and Lebanon and Canada and everything else. So, but it was closest to home. So gradually I started, adapting myself and really enjoying being in Armenia for the first time for a long term and making it my place, making it home. And Armenia helped me a lot as a woman, as a feminist, also to discover myself, to be free, actually. When I tell people it's in Armenia that I learned how to become a feminist and to be free, that people get like, a little bit, they don't understand it fully. But in reality, you see, you challenge yourself in this country and you can learn a lot. So then while in Armenia, I had a chance to travel to Istanbul for the first time. And it was interesting because my grandmother was alive at that time, and I used to talk to her over the phone in Canada, and I used to tell her, Mima, I call her Mima, I'm going to Istanbul because she knows Turkish, and and she was so shocked. She said, "No, you can't." I said, "Why?" "No, you cannot go to Istanbul." And then for her, it was the time where her trauma was, awakened in a way, because I was here, her grandchild, going to Istanbul, to that space where she was fleeing from, in her childhood. So I think that helped me to understand a lot of things of my identity as an Armenian. And I always tell people in the diaspora, you have to take at least one trip to Istanbul to understand really who you are and your struggles and things that you don't have any explanation in your behavior or thinking. So when I went to Istanbul, I felt at home, actually. I felt at home because it reminds me of my grandmother's kitchen, my grandmother's stories, my grandmother's spices, the way she made food, the way she talked, the way she moved. So for me, it was quite shocking in the beginning from somebody coming from the diaspora as well and coming to Armenia and then going unexpectedly to Istanbul for work and coming back. And it felt like all these pieces of puzzles coming together. So it was like, all missing parts of my identity coming together. And also, it was a process of making peace with those pieces of puzzles, because a lot of the pieces are quite difficult to understand, to accept. But this helped me. And doing it while in Armenia helped me even more to understand this.
Wow.
Philosophical.
Yeah, I remember meeting you also in Istanbul, and you came more than once, I guess, right? Okay, I met you one of these times. It was good to hear the way your process of finding yourself never ends, between these countries. You mentioned Brazilians a couple of times, and what you said about resilience, the Western way of resilience in Canada, and the inherited resilience we have from our grandmothers, the difference in everything. And I also admire the way you relate to Armenian women in Armenia through coffee cup reading. In a TED talk, you mention it. And somehow coffee cup reading also works as a practice of maybe resilience or connecting when shame and silence is at stake. Maybe we can talk about this, subject of shame, silence, and sharing stories through coffee cup reading, an Armenian way of resilience, non-Western way of resilience, and maybe how it connects to Western ways of resilience. I don't know, whatever comes.
Coffee cup reading was for me something that my grandmother used to do. It was very casual thing and something I grew up with. I never thought about it as, a way of healing or resilience. But then when I went to university and starting to think about analyzing all these concepts about decolonizing practices and healing justice and all this, I started revisiting this practice of coffee cup reading. And then I realized something that related to trauma, that the generation, my grandmother's generation, where all these women who lived through trauma, they carried it inside them. They never talked about it. It was really, their silences were really quite loud. You could feel it in their movements and the way they were hugging less, but giving food more. So cooking more, that was the way for them of expressing love. Because as we learned eventually that how trauma is in the body, it keeps scores and all this and all these theories. And then I realized that in order for them to live through this, something that they lost is this feeling of security that trauma and genocide and exile, breaks in you. So you don't feel safe. You don't feel safe anywhere. You don't feel safe in your body. You don't feel safe in the space. So I realized that the only place that these women were feeling safe was in the kitchen around the coffee cup table. And when my grandmother, who used to be known of having great skills in coffee cup reading, she would take the coffee cup and start reading, these women were becoming more relaxed. They were laughing. They were talking about issues, they would never talk about. And as a small child, I used to stay in the corner and listen to these women and also observe them, observe how they were reacting, how they were moving, feeling. And I realized that this is their way of creating this safety space, this net among them, this collective which was scattered before they came to this space, to this new space. So these were the practices from, when you go to when I traveled to Canada, and I was working in community centers here, and we were also dealing with a lot of trauma in this Western country, in families, conflicts, domestic violence, drug abuse. All this were very much present. And I was at that time studying in educational psychology, and I used to work in community centers with delinquent youth and families. And it was the same it was not the same trauma, but also how people were reacting was the same. And the main issue was refinding this collective. So this community thing. So I even started thinking that, okay, they are teaching us all these big theories of how you deal with trauma, what you need to do. And I was trying some of them, but not everything was working out. So I said, why not use what my grandmother used to do? So at one point, I brought my coffee cup and jazva to a circle of young delinquents. And I was like young offenders. And I would tell them the story of my grandmother. And people liked hearing the stories. And the stories of how she went through different difficulties and arrived to this country, and then this is what she used to do with her friends. And then they were really mesmerized about this practice of coffee cup reading. And I started to understand that as an Armenian, as somebody who's coming from a very trauma background and families, there are a lot of resilience we've learned as women, but we don't apply it as much. We don't put it in theory in a way. We just do it, hands-on experience. But if you look at it from the Western perspective, it's all, those strategies are there. So when I went back to Garapagh, there were a lot of things that I wanted to do. And because I spent a lot of time in Canada, I was thinking, I was influenced by all these theories of, doing this trainings and showing all these nice slides about trauma, what it is. But these women were not interested in this kind of presentation. What they needed something to connect. They needed something to understand. They needed something that links them to their own ancestors and practices. And coffee cup reading was one such a tool to be used in this way, in a healing perspective, because they understand what the coffee cup is, they know what it is used. It creates a sense of safety. It's something familiar they grew up with. They know their grandmothers used to do it, and it does the job. And the job is to create the safety that was taken away from you and gradually talk about this trauma, talk about the stories. And once you talk about these stories and this trauma, then it's easier to reconstruct what you have lost. So that's why I was trying to do, and I'm trying to continue to do in Armenia, based on the traditions and healing practices that I've learned from my own grandmothers. And teaching it to the Western world as well, because they need it also.
Exactly, the Western world. That was the topic that I was gonna come. The silence and the actually very much individualistic life style in the West, and the silencing in our own communities. I think you have experienced both of them, and we know that your work in Armenia attracted also lots of attention, both positive and negative, of course. And so was it all in diaspora, or it is in diaspora. So if we think about gender inequality, domestic violence, in terms of these very basic things, Where are we in diaspora? Where are our diaspora Armenian communities? In what stage are we? Do we have institutions to consult to?
As someone being between the two, sometimes, but now more and more being in one part, less than in losing the other part a little bit, because I think the longest I lived is in Armenia among all the 3 places I've been to. I start to see how much the silencing is so much louder in the diaspora, so much louder. And anything that you try to do, try to express, to heal from all these centuries of silencing is it's quite very difficult. It's the institutions are still very traditional, conservative, very patriarchal, very much based on silencing everything, spreading more fear on, as if you talk about something is going to be dismantled. But the only thing that is going to be dismantled is this oppression we're living in, and we're not letting us to be free as human beings, as individuals. So this fear that is continue to be present, I see it a little bit less in Armenia. Of course, there are challenges because when I was in Armenia and together with my colleagues and activists, we were feeling that we were struggling against centuries of silencing and shame and being careful and inherited this inherited shame and silencing that we need to preserve. And I understand at certain point this helped us. It was a strategy maybe that helped us to be silenced, to be use shame maybe in a way, but it's not anymore. So when I was working on domestic violence issues together with my colleagues, it was deeper. It was not just like a couple of people going against you or fearing what's happening. It was like very much deeply ingrained in society values and approaches. So you had to deal with all these centuries of silencing in just in this present Armenia. And in the diaspora, I was thinking that diaspora could become like a partner in opening or voicing things, but it was the opposite actually, because in the diaspora, I think diasporan communities, they are even more reproducing the same narrative and mechanics of the oppressor, I would say, or the ones who are, like controlling, or so they think that, okay, this is what we want to be, like the oppressor, because that's success, and we need to continue, and the approach towards Armenia becomes like more like a savior complex, like we need to save Armenia. We need to help them continue preserving traditions, preserving everything, not be liberated, because then something will collapse and we will disappear. These fears are, we constantly working on this. When we are working on domestic violence law, it was not just changing the policy. Policy is the easiest things we've done, but changing the behavior, the thinking, the behind it was very difficult. And for the diaspora, it was if we talk about domestic violence, then automatically is separation of families, and then separation of society and nation and country, and everything will collapse in a way. So that's why we didn't find the support we needed from the diaspora in a way, or very few support. So most organizations are more concentrated on charity work, savior work, white savior, reproducing this white savior complex, that we see from international organizations or humanitarian organizations. But when you approach diasporan organization about human rights or women's rights or gender equality, it's like, no, domestic violence, no, we don't want to talk about it. They will silence you more, or they will ignore you, or it's not something we do. We do charity, we do children, orphans, we do mothers who are poor, these kinds of more safe issues.
I had a chance to visit also Women's Resource Center in Armenia. I'm sure Tallinn also visited, right? It's a beautiful place, and you do incredible work there. And not only post-traumatic work or filing complaints work or protective work, but you're also doing some incredible policy changing work to fight against patriarchy and make policies. You also do incredible proactive work with women. Can you talk about what the Women's Resource Center does, in general?
Resource Center started in 2003. We started it together with a couple of friends. I was the only one from the diaspora. The rest were all from Armenia. We were students at that time, graduate student, and we started at the university, a state university, where a lot of other young women joined us and as volunteers. And today they're the ones who are leading the organization. I'm not the director anymore. It's been I think since COVID, I'm not the director. Anush Bohosian is the director, and she used to be one of our volunteer activists. So we grew up together as a collective. And for us, it was one common thing that for me as a diasporan, in the diasporan communities, you can still see this gender inequality, these stereotypes, all these things. So I had this experience while growing up, and women from Armenia had the same kind of an experience in a different way. So we joined forces to create for ourselves a safe space, an activist space to change things, because we wanted Armenia to be a better place for all of us and not to exclude anyone. And we felt that a lot of people, a lot of voices were excluded in the country and in society. So our main aim was to come together, mobilize our forces, and put pressure on government, on state, and also change mentality and stereotypes that were harmful for women like us to be fully citizens, fully individuals with their rights. So we grew up in this together, and as a grassroots organization, and then we left the university because we also started talking about sexuality, which is another very taboo subject in Armenian society anywhere. So we talked about women's rights to their bodies, to their sexuality, their choices. So these were all topics that were quite difficult to understand at the beginning or to accept from society at large. So gradually we started also opening the space for a lot of other women. So many women were joining us, and we were teaching each other about our rights, about what kind of Armenia or space we are dreaming, what would be good for us as fully citizens living in this country. So that's how we created and the space, and it grew with us, and together it's quite known as an organization and quite attacked, which means that we're doing the right thing and we're pushing the limits, and we're trying to continue pushing the limits despite the difficulties that we're facing, not only inside the country, but outside as well. Geopolitically, it becomes harder. It's becoming more and more militarized region. So you know that how much this can affect women's rights and women's bodies as well. So the challenges are never ending. And based on that, we also founded the Women's Fund, which is a feminist fund, the first in Armenia. Our aim is to redistribute resources. So we try to mobilize a lot of resources and redistribute it to women's organizations and initiatives outside of Yerevan, in the border villages, towns, groups that are not, able to have these resources. So they work and they do the work that they want to do to change in their own communities, also outside of Yerevan. And with the foundation, which is for me, it was based a lot and reminds me a lot about the shirkat I used to attend of my grandmother's shirkat. It's small gatherings that Middle Eastern women used to have in Lebanon, Syria, and other places, where they gather in the mornings where husbands are at work among themselves. They put money together, and then they have like an amount of money, and each month they can allocate it to somebody in the circle who needs it the most. So it was their way of mobilizing funds in a country or society or time where women didn't have as much access to finances or work outside as much. So they were helping each other financially and also emotionally. And for me, women's center concept, it's very much based on this, and it's like a continuation in a more modern world, if we can think about it. And it's inside this foundation that we also started tackling a lot healing justice issues, because we come from traumatic generations, and we inherited a lot of trauma from our ancestors from after the genocide, a lot of trauma from Soviet Armenia, a lot of trauma from the war in Karabakh. So all these traumas are all together, piled up in one small country, and had a lot of effect on what women are experiencing and how they're living. And that's why we created this concept of a feminist healing space in Ashtarak, which is not far from Yerevan. And it's a 2-story house that can host up to 15 women who can come together, spend some time, activists, journalists, LGBT people, those who are not feeling safe in mainstream places, and they can mobilize, heal, co-heal as well, help each other, use traditional practices and new practices to help each other to continue the struggle of changing the country, of changing the practices. So we called it Gardens of Silidar, this space, which is based on the book by women Zabel Yesayan, which is one of my obsessions. And everything I do, it seems, is following her journey from diaspora to Soviet Armenia. I hope I will not end like her, but I will continue. And it will end with me, the traumas and the oppression. So we decided to call it the Gardens of Silidar, because we want to also revisit our own tradition and history and heritages, because feminism didn't come from the Western world. It came also from our grandparents, grandmothers, specifically our mothers, who also taught us how to be resilient in very patriarchal, very militarized societies. So this healing space will be used by collectives and women and whoever is very active in social change, to have a space, safe space, and continue the work they're doing.
Very interesting things you said about this, especially the healing space. Maybe I would like to know more about what are the major issues that you talk in this healing space, and do you see that women in Armenia face the same challenges that women in diaspora face? Because you talked about the connection with the diaspora. It's very different, apparently. Your experience with the diaspora institutions or diaspora as an entity is different than you yourself as a feminist activist in Armenia. And I'd like to see if for you there are different is there any difference in how women behave or what challenges they face and how they react to the challenges? And also I was thinking, because you said about traditions, like when you talk about women's rights or this the fact that they are being silenced, especially in diaspora, because I come from diaspora, I don't know so much about Armenian space, except from what I read on the news and on websites. And talking about women's resilience is somehow the patriarchy fears that it's threatening the traditions and the traditional the roots and all that. And what are the stakes when, as a feminist, you talk about this? What are the stakes for an Armenian woman, both in diaspora and in Armenia, that you face while trying to navigate this network of, like putting you in front of a wall?
Of course, when we talk about the situation of women's rights and how the challenges that women face in the diaspora and in Armenia, there are some common things, but there are also the context are very different as well. There are things that we did not resolve in the diaspora, which is our griefs and post-genocide trauma, and also the fears of disappearing as nation, because there's a loss somewhere we didn't resolve it. In Armenia, there's another kind of trauma, which is the Soviet heritage and the conflict and regional conflicts and the silencing, because for a long time during Soviet Armenia, there was also silencing about what happens in 1915, and there's a disconnect a little bit. So in Armenia, some people will discover about this history more recently than us, when we were growing up with this history from very early ages. The challenges are a little bit different because, and also diasporas are very different. So when you talk about the Middle Eastern or the diasporans and North American diasporans, and it's very difficult, the reality. So even among diasporans, Armenians are different challenges. In Armenia, the fear of losing your identity, it's less pronounced as an Armenian than you have it in the diaspora. In the diaspora, you have this burden, very heavy burden, that you need to show the world what Armenia is, being Armenian is. So I remember when we used to go to school, especially non-Armenian school, our parents and grandparents would tell us, look, you have to do well because you're Armenian. You have to show that Armenians are good students and they're intelligent. So you would go to school and having all these nations burden on you to show the world that you're a good person and you deserve to live and not be killed and not disappear. So unconsciously you have all this. In Armenia, you have a little bit less because you have the physical space, which can less possible to disappear. I don't know now that what's happening around the world. We never know with Trump and everything else. So, but it's less possible that you lose that space. So you don't have this extra burden of teaching your children you have to stay Armenian. So people don't push themselves to send their children to Armenian school, Armenian community center, Armenian scouting, everything else. So there's this burden that is very different. And so once this burden is taken off, it's easier in Armenia, for example, to raise maybe women's rights issue in the society, while in the diaspora, maybe they would be more silencing because you already are fearing that you will disappear somehow, or, you don't need to show the world around you, foreigners, that you're not a good society or a good nation. But depending on the diaspora, also related to domestic violence against women, the difference is that in a lot of countries in the diaspora we live in, maybe not in Lebanon, maybe more in Lebanon now, but for example, in France or Italy or Europe, you have this, or North America, you have this support system for women who want to leave their domestic abuse situation. So there's something there that can help them if they want. Of course, they might lose their whole community in the process, but at least there is an entity, state entity, that can support them in a way, if you can call it as a support. In Armenia, you didn't have that support. So women, that's why policy work was very important, and raising these issues on a legislative level was very much important, even though it will not end domestic violence per se, but it helps at least to have some kind of resources and system that could help women to voice and condemn as well that what's happening, it's not good and it's violence against them, it's violation. In the diaspora, depending on which diaspora you are in, there's already a condemnation. So if you decide to join that condemnation, you might be exiled from your community, but at least you have that option. But in Armenia, it's like, okay, if you talk about what's happening with you as a violence or sexual assault or something, and where do you go from there? Who do you call? Police will not help you at that time. Now it's a little bit different. Police will laugh at you, probably will say, like, it's your family business, go and deal with it. So there is no place that women would go 20 years ago when we started this work. So for us, it was mandatory to talk about this issue and build this system. So if knowing that women will not immediately talk about it, but eventually there is a base for it that could talk. So the struggles are a little bit different because we need to acknowledge each other's traumas and where it's coming from. A lot of women, for example, in Armenia, they don't necessarily understand or acknowledge the trauma that women in the diaspora have lived through to their grandmothers and everything they carry, the burden they carry. And diasporan women, they don't necessarily understand the other trauma that's happening in Armenia right now. And they inherited from Soviet times. And today, most women, they have sons who are going to the army, and they can lose their sons any day if there's a war. So for them, it's a matter of life and death. And a lot of time for diaspora women, this is very far away. So the narratives that we hear in the diaspora about Armenia,
Yes, we are having some technical issues here. Okay.
I think we lost Lara, right?
I thought it was my Wi-Fi.
Yeah, I also thought it was my Wi-Fi, but apparently it is Lara's Wi-Fi at this moment. Let's wait for her to come back.
In the meantime, from the participants, attendees, we can maybe also ask them to be prepared for questions, because soon we're going to move to the question and answer sessions. It's a good time maybe to take this break, and if you have any questions, you can write it in the Q&A part. You can find it just at the bottom of the Zoom square. If you have any questions coming up to you after this very rich presentation, maybe you might want to prepare your questions, and we'll be carrying the questions to Lara. We'll be reading them to Lara. I hope she comes back soon.
Perhaps while waiting for Lara, I can share something that she has been elaborating on diaspora and women's experiences. And I think what she meant, she did not probably put very clearly that we don't have any organization in diaspora to turn to when it comes to domestic violence and gender inequality and all the issues related to patriarchy. And I remember also when still living in Turkey, it was when it was discussed on, from the feminist perspective, also among Armenians. So you should go to the Turkish Women's Organization. So it's a little bit tricky or difficult to think that, Armenian women in Turkey would approach any women's organization, probably rather do nothing, and then there's no way to solve the problem. And I do remember studying the 19th century archives. I was seeing that Armenian women were much more powerful in the provinces than in Istanbul. Or Lara is again.
Yeah,
So
something with my internet. Sorry.
I was just trying to combine it with the Khatuk's story from Çarşamba from 19th century and the documents that are demonstrating as much powerful women actually from the provinces that today we don't know of. And in diaspora, we don't have this inheritance, this knowledge also. To understand that there was a clear cut in that empowerment. I mean, we are in diaspora more at the moment of silence and then denial than to recognize and to get to know that knowledge which would empower us today. So once you're here, you can continue, Lara.
I don't know where I stopped, but can you hear me? Yeah?
Yes. Welcome back.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You're saying about different challenges and how the traumas of women are different, and diaspora women don't really understand, and vice versa.
Yeah. The context, there are certain things that vary in core, very patriarchal, which are present not only in Armenian societies, regardless diaspora or other, it's more global. So there are things that we share in commonly, but there are details and contexts that are very different. For example, now in Armenia, we're living in a heightened militarization situation, and that affects a lot. So we have more and more policies which are more pro-natalist policies, encouraging women to have more children, more soldiers, also not considering choices less and less, because that affects also and that puts in danger the choices that individually we have. So there are things that are changing. And then we have also the recent war that happened and displacement, which comes also with a lot of trauma, and the rise of domestic violence following this conflict, which is a situation that very specific nowadays Armenia. So women now need to care about the wounded, about those soldiers who are came back with PTSDs, and
We lost her again.
Perhaps we can continue with the comments that we have in Q&A.
These are mostly questions actually addressed to Lara, but we can wait for a while. Lara is attending from Montreal, by the way, not from Armenia. And yeah, we lost her again. But even in Montreal, internet might fail, as you can see. Well, a subject we also would like to talk with Lara would be her work on Zabelye Sayan, when she comes back. Yeah, here she is.
Yeah, I'm back.
Back. Okay. We were just saying that one of the topics we would like to talk further with you would be your work on Zabelia Sayan and the beautiful website you created. Would you like to say anything
Yeah.
about how it started, how it's going?
Yeah. I started being interested in Zabel Yesan when I was university student. Before that as well, we used to study her in school. And when I started my activism, it really related to the work I was doing, the search that she was presenting, and the topic she was raising, and very difficult topics. So, and for me, it became like a life project to always continue studying her because there's so many things we can do. And because I cannot do it full time, I wish I had time to completely allocate to the study of her letters. There's a huge collection of letters in French that she wrote, and staying at the museum, Charents Museum, Literature in Armenia. So when I arrived to Armenia to settle there, going there almost every day to spend an hour or two reading her letters was some kind helped me to construct my home in Armenia, because she was the link that kept me together, being herself from the diaspora and making the journey to Armenia, which was for me and for her the right continuation and the closure needed. So I continue reading and analyzing her letters and posting some of the things I find interesting. Of course, I do this when I have time to do it apart from my work. So I started this website where I post and publish things that people cannot have access to it, and try to translate some of it. And then on social media as well, I want to have more content of Armenian women writers. So I started with Zabel Yesan and Sirpui Dusap on Facebook, and I try to post regularly. So young people who are on social media are able to have this content about her, Armenian content on women's rights, feminism, struggles, human social justice, that she raises a lot in her novels. So it's a lifetime work I continue doing, and I'm hoping once I have less work in my activism and at the Women's Center Foundation, I will allocate more time on this. And in parallel, in present time Armenia, we are also gathering with the Women's Fund feminist oral stories of women and other people, LGBT people, trans women as well, about their experiences, their history, legacies, the way they see things in present Armenia, they live things. About their experiences during war and conflict, about their sexuality, about things that maybe our grandmothers didn't have the time or the space, or the shame was too strong to talk about this more intimate issues that we need to hear as Armenian women, how our grandmothers, mothers have lived through their different experiences, how about abortion, childbirth, puberty, menstruation, all these things that are still under silence and we don't talk about it publicly. We're trying to gather it and build an archive around it of women's stories. We started during COVID and then continue doing so. We are a group of feminist researchers and story collectors, and we help each other, we support each other, and we interview different women on these different topics, and we gather it. And hopefully someday we will have a whole archive that can be consulted and used and researched, analyzed, and also transmitted to future generations.
Sounds wonderful. Thank you. In the meantime, 3 questions or comments already arrived, Lara.
Mhm.
Can start with the first one. The first one is from Ayşegül. She says,
Hello, Ayşegül.
Ayşegül says, Lara, I'm touched and mesmerized by your discussion of coffee cup readings as a healing practice, creating a safe space to share stories. Have you by any chance seen Helin Anait's work on coffee cup reading? Were you in Istanbul when she displayed it here? And can you talk about other practices that you have observed women do towards personal and collective healing? What do you think would be a good way for reflecting on and making visible these practices?
Mhm.
Thank you, Ayşe.
No, I don't know the work you mentioned. I would want to know more about it, actually. I use coffee cup as a healing method, and I used it also in other places in Nepal with other women from different countries, origins, to launch the hard discussion around domestic violence and also sexual abuse. I use it mostly on around that topic a lot. Now I'm using it to talk about war and conflict as well. Women who were affected by war, who lost people, and who lived through war. Other practices that we're trying with the Women's Fund to find again, because they are there. It's women healers that we have in Armenia, in different villages. We're trying to find them and collect their stories. And as you know, in Armenia, there are a lot of women use a lot of different things, from herbs, healing herbs, to cooking different things, spices. And this healing space that we have, Gardens of Silidar, will be also a space that we can refine these practices. Maybe putting it in a book, these women healers that we had, and we have still, and also all these recipes that were transmitted to us, um, and also have it, collected and preserve it and use it. And this new space will be a meeting place for all this to come together.
Beautiful. Okay, a second question comes from Füsun. Füsun Ertuğ, welcome Füsun. Füsun says, I would like to hear more about your experiences in Istanbul.
Istanbul, I used to travel a lot because Zabel Yesayan was there and I was following Zabel Yesayan everywhere. So for me, I wanted to see and touch, the places and where she walked and what she was breathing there and what she was seeing and what she wrote about, because she wrote a lot about sceneries about Istanbul, where she lived and her childhood place. So I wanted first to go there to see and experience myself all this. And also Istanbul before this last um, war, it was a space, let's say, some kind of a space where we could gather and women who were affected by the conflict from Georgia, Ossetia, Azerbaijan, Armenia, Nagorno-Karabakh. It was the only place where we could go without visa problems and come together and talk about how is it to live in this conflict in South Caucasus. So that's why I used to travel a lot. That was one of the spaces we can bring all these women from different part of the conflicts together in the same room on the table together and talk and discuss, hope for the future, help each other, maybe increase our collective resilience. So that's how my link was with Istanbul a lot.
Thank you. And one last comment. No, Anush Bohosian said, "It's always so inspiring to listen to Lara and learn from the process. Thank you for everything you do for women's rights and for women all around the world."
Thank you, Anush.
Yes, and a question came about also where we got interrupted. Tem Gostan asks the question. "I was following on YouTube Live when Lara's internet stopped a second time. Can she please continue about women's expectations in Armenia nowadays, post-war and displacement and integration? Moreover, what are Armenian women's expectations in the diaspora to connect them to the realities of women in Armenia?"
Wow, such a huge question. I'll try to answer simply and then maybe we can discuss later on more, Tamar.
This is Tamar, by the way, not Tam. Okay, Tamar.
Um, but after the recent war and displacement, which is another trauma that was added to all the traumas that Armenians lived through, and it was trauma also for diasporans because they relived their traumas through this displacement they were seeing live and experiencing live by being away physically, which was also hard to experiment and experience. So, but the expectations in a way differs because in Armenia right now, because of the losses, and I'm sure you've heard about all the killed soldiers, mostly young men. Um, Now the situation is really different. After the war, the narrative discussions have changed related to the conflict and war. Women are losing a lot. They're losing husbands, brothers, fathers, sons more difficultly. And it's really very close to their life, close to home, what they're experiencing. Women don't want to see their sons get killed again and again and again for years. And this time after the war, we've heard more and more publicly women raising this issue of wanting peace, to stop war, to live normally, peacefully. Of course, from the diaspora, it could be perceived a little bit differently because it's another reality. People and women in the diaspora, they don't live with the fear of being killed and being in war or seeing their children being killed on a regular pace. They don't live on the border of Armenia. We have a longer border right now, which can be very challenging, and their casualties from time to time, and there's no feeling of security. So when you are in this state, it's very difficult. And in the diaspora, you have this more patriotic, nationalistic, unresolved losses of land and territory and fears of losing Armenia, which is also connected very much with the past traumas that diasporans have. But the reality is that in present day Armenia, women and others are living and have their own security issue and fears. And when they start talking about that and raising this issue, there's sometimes miscommunication and not understanding why the needs are different. So in these times, Armenia is going through very challenging times, and Armenia's fate should be decided by people who are living there on a daily life and experiencing all the harsh realities that they are experiencing right now. And that is a little bit sometimes creating conflict because expectations from diaspora are different. But unfortunately, diaspora Armenians are not living in a present day Armenia with real problems that are very much related with everyday life and security. So that I can say. I cannot say more than this because it will take us days, I think.
I want to add something to that in order to clarify or perhaps a little bit more sophistication to it. What I have been experiencing again in diaspora after a long while of living in a place without a community, and then being in Fresno in one of the oldest communities right now in US. And have been, having been some other Armenian communities around the US as well. So the thing is that in diaspora, of course, the type of understanding about Armenia or loss or trauma exists, but then there is another face to it. Each community or each community member, each family lives exactly there where they left their own countries. So in Armenian from Lebanon, Istanbul, or elsewhere in Iraq, they live exactly that same point where they left their countries. So the new country, yes, it gives safety and security, but this doesn't mean necessarily that they're connected to the societies, NGOs, or women's organizations in their new countries. And this takes really generations. I mean, that first generation definitely did not have any type of support mechanism in the new country. Second or third, perhaps. So becoming immigrant makes everything even more difficult. And then your problems, your burdens as an Armenian woman are quite different than that of white women's problems too. I mean, we have to bring in this perspective too, I guess. And yeah, I wanted to add that one.
Mm.
Yeah, thank you. So there is one comment or question actually from Jennifer Manukian. She says, thank you so much for this discussion. Given the resistance to your work from diaspora Armenian organizations and perhaps the Armenian government too, I'm curious about where you managed to find funding to support your inspiring work.
Funding for direct activism, it's for policy changes, things like that, to have the space, secure space. It's from different funders, very varied, mostly Swedish organizations, mainly also from US feminist organizations supporting private foundations, donations as well. But the aim is to be able eventually to be also a little bit more self-sufficient, because there are a lot of things apart from projects we do that we feel it's important, and we have been doing this work voluntarily. Not everything we do at the Women's Resource Center is funded. I would say 50% of the work is not funded, is volunteer based. We have a pool of volunteers that helps us as well. And as a staff, we also allocate volunteer time, because there are things that Western funders, foreign funders, they feel they prioritize, other things they don't prioritize, but we prioritize. So for us, it's important that we do that work. And the aim of having this feminist healing space is also to make it like a social enterprise where we can also generate our own income, and we can use it and redistribute it in the things we find as a collective and women groups important to fund. So we have the strategy of using some of the funds coming from outside, using also donations from our supporters, but also volunteer work, and generating our own income at the same time. So, as from the diaspora or government, we don't receive money. From the diaspora, we used to receive at some point from small organizations, but not anymore. As I said, it's very difficult for diasporans to fund feminist initiatives, women's rights, domestic violence issues. Mostly, diasporan funding is more related to reconstructive work, charity work, but not development or human rights.
Thank you very much for bringing our attention to this topic, Lara, because one of the burning issues is this actually, because in many of the diaspora meetings that we are having, this perspective is completely missing. And this creates an image as if no violence, no domestic violence, no patriarchy, and no problem among Armenian families, which of course is not the case, and it should be addressed. And it's very good that you're underlining that the Armenian organization, the Armenian community organizations outside Armenia should also consider this and take this part of the problem also to create funds. Thank you.
We get sometimes calls from women from the diasporan communities who live through domestic violence experiences or sexual violence, but they feel more at ease to talk to us as a psychological support, because they cannot find support inside their community organizations if they talk about it. So they see our work, so they call us or they visit us or they send us email. And I feel that there is a need in the diaspora to change this inside the community, and condemn as well. There's no condemnation. There's more silencing and not talking about it, ignoring it. It's not our issue. It's not Armenians. Armenians don't beat their wives, etc. So it's going beyond this approach.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
Thank you. So there's a kind of a summary of our webinar coming from an anonymous attendee. It says, "Thank you very much. Lara's explanations about Istanbul's role of being a midpoint for various women from war areas. Another point she raised was very important about their collection of women healer stories, receipts, and reuse them for healing of present-day women's problems, such as coffee cup reading. Thanks," says the attendee. And Tamar continues her question, again asking if you have time, if you would answer this. She says, "Thank you, Lara. Would it be possible to connect it to the pressure of having children in Armenia that you mentioned before? Has the birth rate been affected because of our situation?"
Well, Armenia has always had a demographic issue, and birth rate are very low in general. So different government who came, they tried to encourage, but not in the right way, because if you want to increase birth rate, you have to make gender equality in a better situation, because women don't want to have more children because they live in a society where they take the non-paid care work on them. They have to raise the children and not just. So as long as governments, they don't know how to address the gender equality issue, the birth rate will never go up. But after the war, it became even more difficult, because of the situation and the death and losses. So there's more pro-natalist policies now being put forward with this new government, which in a demographic way is understandable, but it threatens the choices women have, and it puts the burden again on women and the guilt of replacing, lost people, but not really changing anything in the system. You have to change the system. You have to change the patriarchal values and narratives. So women are automatically, the demography will increase. As long as you don't address that, the core issue, the roots of the problem, it's very difficult. Then you have to you impose. There's initiative. There's money. It's not financial. It's not everything to encourage families to have more children. So there's a need to rethink, to research from a gender perspective what's keeping women or families to have less children, and most of the time it's very gendered response to this. We can't hear you. I think you're muted.
More questions came, Lara. Actually, a comment, a very important comment came. Cassandra Tuba says, thank you very much. I understand that an international feminist struggle is necessary and urgent. Our stories. Yeah, thank you. Yes, Cassandra. And one more question from an anonymous attendee. What about work with displaced women and marginalized communities in Armenia? Is there specific support for LGBT women who have been affected by the recent war in Karabakh? Is there specific government addressing them? I'm not sure if
Specifically, government doesn't address marginalized group unless it's people with disabilities. There's a lot of, well, homophobia is very much present in society. But as women organizations, we are open to all women and all marginalized communities. So in all our programs, everyone is included, specifically LGBT people. And there are other organizations very active who during the war helped out specifically marginalized groups. For example, we have an organization works directly with people with living with HIV, who during conflict didn't have access to their medication, so they were helping and sending and helping them to access to this important medication. Also LGBT people who couldn't find a safe shelter while displaced, so they will apply to us or other LGBT organizations like Pink Armenia or Right Side NGO, working mostly with trans people, and they would get the support they needed. But of course, they're not, not all of them are very visible, especially coming from displaced communities. It's very difficult. It's very to talk these issues, and government doesn't necessarily address that. It's us as organizations. We mainly try to include and create a safe space for them and address their needs, immediate needs, especially during humanitarian assistance. We had specific aid going to LGBT women and marginalized groups.
Oh, just
More
when
questions.
yes, another question came from Agnieszka. I hope I pronounce it right, Kaim. Agnieszka says, have you managed to break the silence of your grandmothers and heal them a little? Have you traveled from Istanbul to the cities where they came from? A personal question.
That's a very important question. That's what I'm planning to do next. Let's see when the time will come. And I will take this hard journey, which would be very emotional, but I will definitely do it. And I'm working on a book right now about storytelling on this, and let's see where it leads me. And definitely looking that to do that.
Thank you, Lara. It's been 1.5 hours and 1.5 hours, and then I think we had a lot of questions, and we are happy to have you and all the participants and very engaged participants. Eileen is okay. Eileen will come back, I guess. So thank you very much, and we'll have this webinar online probably from tomorrow onwards. Those who cannot watch now, we will be watching later on. And thanks a lot, Lara. It was a pleasure, and we learned a lot from you. It was a very enriching webinar. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Thank
Lara.
you so much. Thank you very much. Thank you. And good luck.
Yeah,
Thank
we'll be here to join you when you go travel for your grandmothers, whenever you want.
Definitely, we should do that together.
I'm counting on that.
You should do that together. Sure.
Thank you.
Thank you for